The sun had barely begun to rise over Naval Station Norfolk, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold, when Chief Petty Officer Samuel "Sam" Harper stepped off the transport helicopter. The rotors kicked up sand, dust, and the faint smell of fuel, whipping his perfectly pressed uniform into minor disarray. His polished boots struck the helipad with a deliberate, unhurried rhythm, a sound that seemed to echo in the quiet morning. He was 68, yet his posture remained remarkably straight, the product of decades in the Navy. The creases on his face, however, betrayed his age, each line a silent witness to battles, storms, and missions that had long been classified. Young sailors and officers on the helipad paused mid-step, turning their heads to watch him move. There was an unspoken tension in the air, some curiosity, some amusement, some barely suppressed skepticism. To them, Sam Harper seemed almost like a relic, a figure from a past era who had somehow wandered into their modern, high-tech world of digital maps, drones, and jet-fast helicopters. Whispers started circulating. "Isn't that the old guy who flew with the fleet in '82? Doesn't he even retire?" Captain David Reynolds, barely 35, with sharp features and a reputation for blunt sarcasm, had been standing near the edge of the helipad, arms crossed, scanning the morning operations report on a tablet. He noticed Sam immediately, and with the practiced confidence of someone who thrived on authority, walked toward him, the metallic echo of his boots announcing every step. A faint smirk played across Reynolds's face, one part curiosity, one part mockery. "Seriously, Sam," Reynolds said loudly enough for the surrounding crew to hear, "still needed at this age? Or just here to collect a few medals and tell stories about the good old days?" The laughter that followed was awkward at first, some forced, some genuine, but it quickly subsided as all eyes turned toward Sam. Sam stopped and slowly removed his cap, holding it against his chest. He didn't flinch, didn't blush, didn't show any sign that the insult had landed. Instead, he allowed the wind to tug gently at the corners of his uniform and surveyed the helipad before him. The sleek helicopters lined up like metallic predators, the steel deck glinting in the morning light, and the young faces of men and women who were the current generation of the Navy. He let a silence hang in the air, a pause so deliberate it felt almost theatrical. The laughter had died down completely. The youngest sailors shifted uncomfortably, sensing the authority in the man before them. Even Reynolds, usually quick to dominate any conversation, felt a subtle, inexplicable tension knotting in his chest. Then in a low, calm voice that cut through the morning breeze, Sam said, "You'll see, Captain, sooner than you think." The words were simple, almost casual, yet they carried weight. A promise, a warning, an assertion of skill honed over decades. The young officers exchanged glances, uncertain what to make of it. Some felt challenged, others unsettled. Reynolds felt a prickle at the back of his neck, a rare moment where his ego was confronted by something real, something unyielding. Sam's eyes lingered on the helicopters, on the fleet beyond the station, and then back to Reynolds. There was no malice in his gaze, only the quiet confidence of someone who had seen storms, both literal and metaphorical, and had survived every one. A faint smile tugged at his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes were steel, eyes that had watched comrades fall and learned lessons the younger generation could not yet understand. A sudden gust of wind swept across the helipad, tossing loose gear into the air and whipping hair into faces. Sam tightened his grip on his cane, not because he needed it for support, but because it anchored him in the moment, a symbol of resilience. The crew watched as he adjusted his stance, unshaken by the chaos of the wind. Reynolds tried again, this time lowering his voice slightly but keeping a sharp edge. "Look, Sam, I get it. Experience counts. But we operate in a world that moves fast, drones, satellites, AI-driven navigation. It's not exactly the 1980s anymore. You might be a little out of step." Sam didn't answer immediately. He took a slow breath, letting the words settle like dust in the air. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm, precise, and deadly effective. "Captain, it's not about being in step. It's about knowing when to move and when to wait, about seeing what others can't and acting when they hesitate. Age doesn't teach that. Experience does. The statement caused a ripple of unease. The younger officers shifted on their feet. Even Reynolds, who prided himself on command presence, felt a subtle chill of doubt creep into his thoughts. Sam's reputation was legendary for a reason, not because he bragged, but because every word, every action, carried proof of decades in combat, storms, and missions where failure meant death. Sam adjusted his jacket, straightened his back, and took another measured step toward the helipad's edge. I've seen storms that would make your drone spin out of control. I've faced crises where hesitation could cost lives, and I've done it and I've come home. Every time. The morning was still except for the distant roar of the fleet and the clanging of loose equipment in the wind. A lone seagull wheeled overhead, its cry almost eerie against the tense silence. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the young sailors began to feel it. The weight of history in one man's presence, the undeniable aura of someone who had been tested by fire and never failed. Reynolds, sensing his authority challenged in a way he wasn't used to, stepped closer, fists tightening unconsciously. "You talk a lot for someone who's technically retired," he muttered, trying to regain control, though his voice lacked the earlier certainty. Sam turned to fully face him, cane firmly planted, eyes locked on the younger man. "Captain," he said slowly, deliberately, "when the time comes you'll see who's still needed and who's not. That time is closer than you think." For a heartbeat, the helipad felt suspended in time. The dust and wind swirled around them. The helicopters sat like statues in the morning light, and every eye was on the exchange. The younger officers could feel the tension humming through the air, thick enough to touch. The laughter, the smirks, the casual confidence, they all evaporated in the shadow of Sam Harper's calm certainty. The captain opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. Even the wind seemed to pause, holding its breath as if waiting for the next move. Sam's gaze swept over the helipad, over the fleet beyond, and then back to the young sailors. "Pay attention," he said, voice low, yet carrying across the distance. "Opportunities to prove yourself or to fail don't wait for permission. They arrive whether you're ready or not." A faint murmur ran through the crew, curiosity and apprehension mingling. Something was coming, though no one yet knew what. The kind of test that would separate the competent from the unprepared. A challenge no simulation could replicate. And at the center of it all, standing like a sentinel of decades of Navy discipline, was Sam Harper, the man everyone had quietly doubted, the man who now carried an almost mystical authority. He straightened his jacket again, tucked his cap under his arm, and began walking toward the operations room. Every step measured, deliberate. The young officers fell into formation behind him instinctively, drawn by respect, fear, or both. Reynolds, trailing slightly, clenched his jaw. This was not how he had imagined the morning would go. As the helipad buzzed with renewed activity, the distant hum of an approaching transport helicopter added another layer of tension. Sam's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, something, or someone, was about to test not only his skills but the entire fleet. And when it came, he would be ready. The laughter and mockery of the morning were gone. In their place was a tense, charged anticipation. The kind of anticipation that makes even the most confident men and women pause, sensing the storm before it hits. And in that moment, Sam Harper allowed himself a faint smile. He had faced storms before, and he would face this one too. Because some men, no matter their age, are never truly past their time. And on this helipad, everyone, especially Captain Reynolds, was about to find out just how needed Sam Harper still was. Inside the operations room, the hum of computers and the steady blinking of radar screens filled the air like a living heartbeat. Sam Harper moved quietly to the back, allowing the younger officers to chatter nervously among themselves. The room smelled of coffee, engine oil, and recycled air, a combination that made the seasoned veteran feel almost nostalgic. This place was different from the warships he had commanded in the past, but the tension, The stakes, they felt the same. Captain Reynolds, packing near the central console, looked over the latest satellite reports, his fingers drumming impatiently on the metal surface. He glanced up and saw Sam leaning on his cane, scanning the screens with calm precision. Reynolds's pride bristled. "I hope you're not here to babysit," he said loudly, making sure everyone heard. The young officers chuckled nervously, unsure whether to laugh or take the comment seriously. Sam didn't react immediately. He walked over to a large digital map projected onto the wall, tracing the fleet's position with fingers that bore the calluses of decades at sea. His movements were deliberate, controlled, as if every gesture contained years of accumulated wisdom. "Captain," he said finally, voice calm but firm, "I've flown in worse storms, faced worse odds, and come home with everyone intact. Keep your doubts. They'll make your failure taste sweeter." The words carried weight. The room fell silent. Even Reynolds paused mid-sentence, caught off guard by the authority in Sam's tone. The younger officers exchanged uneasy glances. Some were inspired, others intimidated, but all knew something had shifted. Suddenly, a sharp, urgent alarm cut through the room, a sound designed to ignite adrenaline and demand action. On the radar, a blip appeared, moving fast, erratic, heading directly toward the fleet. Unidentified aircraft. No transponder, no communication, just a threat. Reynolds's instinct kicked in. "All stations report. Identify the target," he barked, his voice carrying over the comms. Officers scrambled to their stations, typing furiously, analyzing data, calling pilots. Panic threatened to seep in, but Sam's calm presence seemed to anchor the room. He stepped closer to the main console, pointing at the screen. "Adjust heading to 45. Engage intercept protocol immediately," he instructed, his voice low but carrying unmistakable authority. The young officers hesitated, looking at Reynolds for confirmation. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, Sam's eyes locked on his, and something in that gaze, a combination of experience, confidence, and unwavering calm, froze the captain in place. "Now," Sam said, one word simple and precise, but enough to cut through the chaos. Orders flew from Sam's lips like commands in a symphony. Drones were vectored to intercept, radar locks adjusted, fighter jets scrambled. Every movement he dictated was fluid, almost effortless, yet perfectly calculated. The younger officers followed his lead, their earlier confidence replaced by reliance on a man they had underestimated just hours before. Reynolds watched, incredulous. Every order Sam gave was correct, every maneuver anticipated. The unidentified aircraft changed vectors, trying to evade detection, but Sam's experience seemed to predict its every move. The tension in the room ratcheted up with each passing second. One young pilot, Lieutenant Jameson, hesitated at the controls, uncertainty flashing across his face. The potential for disaster was real, palpable. Sam's hand shot out, steadying the console. "Not yet. Wait," he commanded. Jameson froze, gripping the joystick tightly. Seconds felt like hours. Then Sam nodded. The pilot engaged the intercept perfectly. The blip slowed, neutralized, no harm done, no damage, no casualties. The room exhaled collectively. Relief washed over the officers, but Reynolds was pale. His face was a mixture of awe, frustration, and disbelief. He had underestimated the old veteran, thinking age equaled obsolescence. He had been wrong, dead wrong. Sam's eyes scanned the room, now filled with a mixture of relief and lingering tension. "Do you see now, Captain?" he asked softly, almost rhetorically. "Experience isn't measured by age. It's measured by the ability to act when everything else is uncertain." Reynolds clenched his jaw, a wave of conflicting emotions coursing through him. Anger, humility, and grudging respect collided in a storm he didn't yet know how to process. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Sam's gaze lingered, piercing yet calm, and Reynolds realized he was being schooled by a man he had dismissed moments earlier. The young officers, meanwhile, couldn't stop watching. Sam's calm under pressure, his quick decision-making, and his ability to anticipate threats they had barely even noticed were nothing short of extraordinary. Whispered comments started circulating. "I didn't know he could still move like that. How does he know all of this? He's legendary." Sam finally leaned back slightly, letting the room settle. "Remember this," he said, voice carrying even over the low hum of machinery. "Panic doesn't save lives. Hesitation kills. You wait for orders from the wrong people and the result is always the same: disaster." Reynolds, still struggling with his pride, finally stepped forward. "Sir, how did you—" he began, but Sam interrupted. "Don't ask how. Ask yourself what you would have done if I weren't here, because someday there will be no backup, and that's when you'll understand why some men are still needed." The alarm stopped, but the room remained tense. Sam's words lingered like smoke in the air. Every officer understood. What had just happened was not a drill. It was a real test, and the fact that disaster had been averted was due entirely to the man they had doubted. Suddenly, the room's attention snapped to another screen, a secondary radar feed blinking ominously. Another blip, different vector, faster, smaller, no transponder, and it was headed straight for the station's helipad. The crew froze. Reynolds's stomach turned. The reality was immediate and terrifying. The first threat had been only a warning. The second could be catastrophic. Sam didn't flinch. He straightened, cane in hand, eyes narrowing. "Looks like the test isn't over," he said quietly, almost to himself, but loud enough for the officers to hear. "And this one will separate the prepared from the reckless." Reynolds swallowed hard, the weight of the situation settling in. He glanced at Sam, expecting hesitation, doubt, a moment of faltering. There was none, only a calm, unshakable resolve. A man who had faced storms, enemies, and battles far beyond the comprehension of the young officers surrounding him. Sam's gaze swept over the room, and for a moment it felt like the fleet itself held its breath. Every sensor, every pilot, every officer would rely on his decisions. And if he failed, the consequences would be immediate, devastating. Then, almost imperceptibly, Sam leaned slightly toward Reynolds and whispered, with a steel-cold certainty, "Pay attention, Captain. This is why I'm still needed." The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Every officer understood. The calm before the storm had ended. What came next would test every skill, every decision, every ounce of courage they possessed. And outside, the wind picked up, whipping the helipad into a frenzy of noise and motion, a precursor to the challenge about to hit them. The younger officers swallowed hard. Reynolds's hands tightened into fists, and Sam Harper simply stood, ready, knowing the true test of skill and experience was just moments away. The silence before chaos was electric, and the entire operations room felt it. The first blip had been a warning. The second was the real test V outside. The morning sky had transformed from soft gold to a churning gray, as though the heavens themselves were warning the fleet of what was coming. Clouds twisted violently, and gusts of wind screamed across the helipad, rattling the rotors of stationary helicopters and sending loose equipment clattering against the steel deck. The storm had arrived, and with it, an urgency that no simulation could replicate. Sam Harper stepped onto the helipad, his cane tapping rhythmically against the steel. The wind tugged at his jacket, but his posture remained unwavering. Around him, young sailors scrambled to secure equipment, their fingers trembling slightly as the gusts tore at them. Sam's eyes scanned the approaching storm and the radar feed simultaneously, calculating, predicting, assessing every variable that most would have missed. Captain Reynolds, following behind, barked orders that competed with the wind's howl. "Secure the choppers. All stations report. We don't have much time." But even his sharp, commanding voice seemed fragile against the sheer chaos of the storm. The young officers hesitated, uncertainty flashing in their eyes. Sam stepped forward, pointing toward the approaching blip on the radar. "We don't wait for panic," he said, his voice carrying over the gusts. We act. Adjust the vectors for the intercept drones. Vector the F-35 squadron at 45 degrees. Do it now." The crew froze for a moment, looking to Reynolds for confirmation. He hesitated, caught between his instinct to command and the undeniable authority radiating from Sam. Then, with a grunt, he gestured sharply. "Do it. Follow him." The helicopters groaned under the wind's assault, metal screaming, rotors straining. The radar blip moved unpredictably, as if mocking their attempts to predict it. Sam leaned over the console, eyes narrowing. His fingers flew over controls with the precision of a man who had lived entire lifetimes in these moments. "Don't fire yet," he ordered. "We observe, then strike. Timing is everything." A young pilot, Lieutenant Harper, no relation but sharing the name, gripped the joystick so tightly that his knuckles whitened. "Sir, it's coming fast. Too fast. We won't have time to react if it shifts." Sam didn't flinch. "You have time. Trust your instruments, trust your training, and above all, trust me." Lightning split the sky above, illuminating the helipad and casting long shadows that flickered like specters across the deck. The wind tore at Sam's jacket, whipping his sleeves around his arms, but he remained focused, unmoving. Every officer in the room could feel it. The calm eye of the storm, centered on this man who refused to panic. Reynolds's voice rose, nearly breaking. "Move the intercept drones, adjust the trajectory." But his orders were redundant. Sam had already calculated the path, accounted for the wind, the storm, the angle of attack. Every detail had been anticipated. A violent gust shook the helipad. One of the helicopters teetered dangerously, metal shrieking as it strained against the tethers. Sailors shouted warnings, scrambling to secure it, but the wind was relentless. Sam's eyes flicked to the helicopter, then back to the radar screen. "Hold position," he barked. "Now we maintain the vector, trust the maneuvering protocols." Time seemed to stretch. The radar blip danced like a phantom, shifting faster than anyone anticipated. Pilots adjusted their controls instinctively, but the uncertainty gnawed at them. Another lightning strike illuminated the blip. It was closing fast, angling directly for the helipad. Reynolds felt his stomach churn. He wanted to take control, to assert authority, to correct Sam, but he realized as he watched the veteran's calm, precise calculations that any interference could spell disaster. Sam's voice, low and steady, cut through the storm. "Remember what I said, Captain. Hesitation kills. Panic doesn't save lives. Act with clarity or we all fail." The first drone engaged the target, locking onto its trajectory. The young officer at the console froze, fear gripping him. The blip shifted again, faster, more erratic. Sam's eyes narrowed. "Minor course correction. Do it now." The officer's fingers trembled, but he obeyed. Seconds later, the intercept course aligned perfectly. The drone engaged, and for a moment it seemed as though time itself had slowed. The storm's roar faded into background noise, eclipsed by the collective focus of the officers and Sam's unwavering command. Then, with a sudden, terrifying clarity, the blip shifted again, faster, sharper, and closer to the fleet than anyone had anticipated. A helicopter rocked violently, throwing unsecured equipment into the air. Sailors shouted, clutching ropes and metal supports, bracing for impact. Sam's cane hit the deck in a precise tap, anchoring him as he issued orders. "Brace all units, angle the helos, engage emergency stabilization protocols, now." The young officers moved in perfect synchrony, their fear overridden by the precision of Sam's instructions. Even Reynolds, who had mocked this man hours earlier, found himself obeying without question. There was no time to think, only action mattered. Lightning struck close to the helipad, momentarily blinding them. The wind tore at clothing and hair, slicing through the air with metallic screams. Sam's calm voice carried through the chaos. "Steady, don't panic, we move as one unit." A sudden roar from the approaching aircraft made the deck tremble. Sam's eyes never wavered. He had been in situations like this before, when the margin between life and death was measured in inches and seconds. He had faced storms at sea that could have swallowed the fleet whole. And now, decades later, he was proving, once again, that experience was invaluable. Reynolds's jaw tightened. He barked orders, but they were redundant, unnecessary. Sam had anticipated every maneuver, every gust of wind, every potential misstep. The young pilots, guided by his calm, steady voice, executed their commands flawlessly. The unidentified blip shifted again, veering dangerously close to the fleet. Panic threatened to take hold, but Sam's presence anchored the crew. "Hold your ground. Trust the protocols. Trust me," he repeated, voice calm, resolute. The blip slowed just enough. The drones intercepted, guiding it away from the helipad. One of the helicopters swayed violently, but the crew held firm, ropes and tethers straining against the wind. Sam's eyes never left the radar. His hands moved with meticulous precision, directing every unit, predicting every move. Then, almost imperceptibly, the storm began to shift. The winds eased, the lightning grew less frequent, the radar blip stabilized and finally retreated, neutralized without casualties. The room exhaled collectively, a mixture of relief, awe, and disbelief washing over them. Reynolds stood frozen, staring at Sam. The words he wanted to say, boast, reprimand, assert authority, failed to materialize. All he could do was stare at the man he had mocked hours earlier, realizing with a sudden, uncomfortable clarity that he had underestimated not just Harper's skill, but the value of experience itself. Sam leaned on his cane, catching his breath. His jacket was torn slightly, wind-flattened, but his posture remained regal, commanding. The young officers stared, unsure whether to cheer, to applaud, or simply stand in stunned silence. Sam had done the impossible. He had taken a chaotic, life-threatening situation and tamed it with nothing but decades of knowledge, calm precision, and unshakable resolve. Finally, Sam turned to the room, voice carrying a quiet authority that silenced any remaining chatter. "Remember this," he said. "Fear is contagious. Panic spreads. But control, precision, and experience, that's how we survive." Reynolds swallowed hard, his ego battered. The storm outside had tested their skill, and Sam Harper had proven that even in a world dominated by technology, drones, and high-speed jets, some men, some experience, were still indispensable. But even as relief settled in, the radar flickered ominously. Another blip appeared on the edge of detection, small, fast, and erratic. The storm had passed, but the threat was far from over. Sam's eyes narrowed. "Captain, it's not done," he muttered, almost to himself. Then, louder to the crew, "Prepare for the next phase. This is why I'm still needed." The officers froze, glancing at one another. The storm had been survived, but the real test, the one that would challenge every nerve, every skill, every ounce of courage, was just beginning. And out on the horizon, beyond the roaring winds and flickering radar signals, the next challenge approached, unseen but imminent. The helipad fell into a tense, almost electric silence. Sam Harper stood at its center, calm, focused, ready to face whatever was coming next. The radar blip was no longer a distant warning. It had moved closer, faster than any of the fleet's protocols could track with comfort. The storm had passed, leaving a tense, charged quiet over the helipad, broken only by the faint hum of helicopters, the whirring of drones, and the nervous whispers of young officers. Sam Harper stood at the center, his eyes fixed on the screens, calm as ever, though every fiber of his being was engaged. Captain Reynolds paced, fists clenched, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down like a storm he couldn't control. "How? What is that thing?" he muttered under his breath, eyes darting from one feed to another. Sam didn't answer immediately. He merely leaned closer to the radar console, his fingers tracing the fast-moving blip with a precision born from decades of experience. "It's testing us," Sam finally said, voice low but firm. "And we're about to find out which of us can act when others freeze." The young officers exchanged uneasy glances. Fear, adrenaline, and awe mingled in the air like a living thing. They had survived the storm, but this, whatever approached now, was unpredictable. The unknown was far more dangerous than the winds and rain. The first drone engaged, flying directly toward the blip, but it veered off mid-flight as if anticipating the maneuver. Sam's eyes narrowed. "It's adaptive," he muttered. "Not a random pattern, a calculated threat. We're dealing with someone or something that's testing our every move." Lieutenant Harper's hands shook on the joystick. "Sir, it's faster than any drone we have. We can't keep up." Sam didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his cane tapping lightly on the deck. "Adjust course, vector intercept ahead of the target's trajectory, not behind it. Predict, don't react." The young officers hesitated, glancing at Reynolds. The captain wanted to interject, to assert his authority, but he realized painfully that interference could ruin everything. He took a deep breath and stepped back, watching the veteran take control. "Steady," Sam said. "Every action has a reaction. Don't panic, don't hesitate, anticipate." The blip changed course again, angling toward the helipad itself. Alarms blared, red lights flashing across the operations room. A nearby helicopter swayed dangerously, almost tipping as gusts of wind from the storm earlier still rattled the area. Sailors shouted, gripping ropes and tethers, bracing for impact. Sam leaned over the main console, fingers moving rapidly. "Angle the helos to wind, adjust drone trajectory, vector fighter squadron. Now." The commands poured from him like a waterfall, rapid, precise, unrelenting. The young officers followed, their earlier fear replaced by a tense focus. Even Reynolds, despite his pride, realized there was no other option but to obey. The blip hovered, then darted suddenly toward the fleet's perimeter. Drones and fighters reacted, but the target moved unpredictably, testing their every move. Sweat dripped down young faces. The air was thick with tension, the kind that makes seconds feel like hours. Sam's voice cut through the chaos, calm and unwavering. "Correct course. Lead, don't follow, anticipate the vectors. Adjust intercept now." The officers executed, barely daring to breathe. The blip slowed, hesitated, then retreated slightly, a mistake. Sam's eyes glinted. "Now," he said, "engage." The drones converged, forcing the blip into a controlled path. One of the helicopters rocked violently, but the crew held firm. Sam's fingers danced over the console, correcting trajectories, predicting movements, accounting for wind, momentum, and human error. Reynolds watched in disbelief. The precision, the timing, the calm authority. It was unlike anything he had witnessed. The man he had mocked, who had arrived as a relic, was now the single most crucial factor keeping the fleet safe. Suddenly, a violent gust tore through the helipad. Loose gear flew into the air. A helicopter tilted dangerously, scraping against its tethers. Shouts echoed. Time seemed to freeze. Sam didn't move a muscle except to tap a command into the console. "Steady," he said, voice cutting through the chaos. "Hold your positions. Trust the vectors. Trust me." The young officers obeyed, their fear balanced by the undeniable authority radiating from Sam. The blip shifted again, faster, closer. Another second of hesitation, and the consequences would have been catastrophic. Then with terrifying clarity the blip halted. It hovered almost as if studying them. Sam leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but steely. "This is it. Observe, predict, act. Hesitation is death." The room went silent, every eye fixed on the radar screen. Even Reynolds felt the sweat on his brow, the tightness in his chest. The young officers gripped their controls, holding breaths that felt like lifetimes. "Engage the intercept now," Sam commanded. The drones moved in perfect unison, guiding the blip away from the helipad and toward a neutral zone. A fighter jet adjusted its trajectory, cutting off the blip's escape path. Sam's calculations were flawless, predicting every evasive move, every shift in momentum. For a moment, it seemed impossible that the threat could be contained. Then, with a final adjustment, the blip's course stabilized. It slowed, then retreated, neutralized without any damage, without casualties. The operations room exhaled collectively, relief mixed with awe. The young officers stared at Sam, speechless. Reynolds, pale and shaken, finally spoke, his voice low. I underestimated you." Sam straightened, his posture unwavering. "No, Captain, you underestimated what experience can accomplish when applied with clarity and calm. Age isn't weakness. It's the accumulation of lessons learned the hard way." The storm outside had been survived. The crisis had been averted, but the officers knew deep down that the test was far from over. Sam's gaze swept across the room. There's always another threat, always, and the moment you think you've mastered the last one, the next arrives, often worse than the last. The young officers nodded, understanding more than words could express. They had witnessed a master at work, a man who refused to panic, who could see patterns invisible to the inexperienced eye, who turned chaos into order. Reynolds swallowed hard, pride and humility warring inside him. He had mocked this man hours earlier, dismissed him as irrelevant. Now, the realization hit like a thunderclap. Sam Harper wasn't just still needed, he was indispensable. Just as the room began to settle, a faint blip appeared at the edge of the radar, small, fast, erratic. Sam's eyes narrowed, the faintest smile tugging at his lips. "Looks like the real test is just beginning," he said. The young officers froze. The storm had passed, but a new challenge was already approaching, something far faster, far more unpredictable. Sam's calm presence offered reassurance, but even he could not predict everything. He leaned toward Reynolds, voice low, almost a whisper. "Captain, we're about to find out why some of us are still needed." The tension in the room was palpable. Every officer understood that the battle was far from over. Every second mattered. Every decision counted. And at the center of it all stood Sam Harper, calm, precise, unyielding. The radar blip pulsed once more, like a heartbeat, signaling the arrival of the next challenge. And with that, the fleet, the officers, and Captain Reynolds braced themselves for the storm that was yet to come. The test had begun in earnest. The morning air, now charged with tension and the faint tang of ozone from the storm's passing lightning, was thick with anticipation. The fleet had stabilized, but the radar told a different story. The blip had returned, faster, smaller, and more unpredictable than before. Every officer, every sailor, every pilot knew instinctively that this was no ordinary test. It was a trial that could decide life or death in a matter of seconds. Sam Harper stood at the operations console, calm, unshakable, as if he had been expecting this exact moment. His eyes, sharp and calculating, tracked the blip's erratic patterns. Captain Reynolds, packing behind him, felt a knot in his chest tighten. "Sir, we've never seen anything move like that," he muttered, his voice betraying a hint of panic he tried to suppress. Sam didn't turn. "It's not about speed, Captain," he said evenly. "It's about anticipation. Every movement it makes is an opportunity to control it. Hesitate and it's gone, or worse, it's here." Lieutenant Harper gripped the controls of the intercept drone, sweat dripping down his temple. "Sir, if it changes course again, we'll have no time to react." "Then don't react," Sam replied without looking up. "Predict, act before it moves, not after." A sudden shift in the blip's trajectory sent a jolt of alarm through the operations room. Alarms blared, lights flickered red, and the low hum of the fleet's engines seemed to intensify. One of the nearby helicopters rocked dangerously, loose equipment clattering against the deck. Sailors shouted, gripping tethers, bracing against the sudden gusts. "Angle the helos," Sam commanded, cane tapping firmly against the console. "Stabilize all craft, prepare the fighters, lead the intercept." The young officers moved as one, guided by Sam's precision and authority. Reynolds barked orders, but each one felt redundant. The older man had anticipated every variable, every gust of wind, every minor error the crew could make. Sam's command was flawless, executed with the fluidity of someone who had lived these moments countless times before. The blip darted again, faster this time, heading directly for the helipad. Time stretched painfully as the officers adjusted trajectories, launched drones, and vectored fighter jets. The first fighter barely missed a collision with a low-flying helicopter, the pilot's hands shaking as adrenaline surged through him. "Hold your ground," Sam's voice cut through the chaos. "Trust your instruments, trust your training, trust me." The blip slowed momentarily and opening. Sam's fingers flew over the console. Engage intercept. Lead, don't follow. Predict the evasion vector. The drones surged forward, aligning perfectly with the blip's projected course. The fighter jets flanked it from either side. For a moment it seemed as though control had been achieved. But then the blip moved in a way no one expected. Reverse, lateral, sudden acceleration, testing the crew's nerves and skill. A sailor shouted, "It's impossible, we can't keep up." Sam's gaze never wavered. "It's not impossible, it's predictable. Adjust your angle of approach, correct for velocity, anticipate its next move. Now." The drones responded, following his commands with mechanical precision. The fighter jets adjusted, though their pilots gritted teeth against the violent maneuvering. Another helicopter swayed violently nearby, threatening to tip over. Sam tapped the console again. "Angle stabilizers now. Hold your positions." Time seemed to slow. Sweat dripped from brows. Every officer knew a single misstep could be catastrophic. Reynolds swallowed hard, gripping the edge of a console. He realized his pride had been a liability earlier. Now, the survival of the fleet depended entirely on a man he had mocked hours before. "Now," Sam shouted. The drones and fighter jets converged. The blip was forced into a controlled trajectory. A sudden spark from one of the intercept drones indicated a successful engagement, yet the blip was far from neutralized. It pulsed like a heartbeat on the radar, darting unpredictably, refusing to be contained. Lieutenant Harper's hands shook uncontrollably. It's learning, adapting. We can't keep up." "Good," Sam said, calm as ever. "Then we adapt faster, predict its patterns. Every maneuver it makes is an invitation. Every hesitation is a chance. Act with precision, not panic." The blip made its move toward the central command deck. Alarms screamed. Sailors shouted, gripping railings, bracing against the sudden gusts that seemed to surge from the approaching threat. One officer stumbled, nearly losing control of a drone. "Steady, don't panic," Sam barked. "You are the masters here, control the chaos." Seconds felt like hours. The radar blip veered, accelerating, directly threatening the helipad. One helicopter, unsteady from the earlier storm, teetered dangerously, ropes straining under the tension. Sam didn't flinch. He tapped a final series of commands into the console. The fleet responded instantly, every maneuver executed with near perfection. The blip slowed, trapped between drones and fighter jets. It hovered for a heartbeat, then veered sharply toward the open water. One drone engaged, redirecting it entirely away from the fleet. The danger passed. The operations room erupted, not with celebration but with a stunned silence. Relief mingled with awe and exhaustion. Every officer, young and old, knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. Reynolds, pale and trembling slightly, stepped forward. "Chief Harper, I." Sam turned, his face calm but eyes blazing with intensity. "Captain, don't speak yet. The lesson isn't over. You see, it's not about a single threat. It's about preparation, anticipation, and clarity under pressure. One victory does not guarantee the next. And this is why I'm still needed." The officers nodded, understanding without question. They had been tested in real time, under conditions no simulation could replicate, and survived because of Sam Harper's skill, calm, and experience. Outside, the sky cleared slightly, though tension still hummed in the air. The radar flickered once more, showing another blip appearing at the edge of detection, a reminder that the test and the danger was far from over. Sam leaned back, breathing steadily. His eyes scanned the room, sweeping over young faces pale with adrenaline, over Captain Reynolds's stunned expression, over the calm, trembling officers who had just survived their first true confrontation. "Remember this moment," he said softly. "When the world tests you, it will not ask if you are ready. It will only demand action. And the measure of a person is not in their age, their title, or their rank. It is in the clarity of their response when everything else fails." Reynolds swallowed, pride and humility warring inside him. He had mocked this man hours earlier. Now he understood. Sam Harper wasn't just still needed. He was indispensable. A faint pulse on the radar caught Sam's eye. Another signal, faint but unmistakable, appeared on the edge of detection, moving fast, erratic, intelligent. Sam's lips curved slightly. "Looks like the real test isn't over yet," he said. The young officers stiffened. The storm had been survived, the first threat neutralized. But now something else was coming, something faster, smarter, and potentially far more dangerous. Sam Harper adjusted his stance, cane planted firmly, eyes narrowing. "Brace yourselves. The next phase is about to begin." The helipad held its breath. The fleet waited. The officers, the captain, and even the wind seemed to pause. And in that tense silence, one truth was undeniable. This veteran, mocked, underestimated, dismissed, was still the most needed person on the deck. The pulse on the radar grew stronger, closer. The real confrontation, the one that would demand everything they had, was about to begin. Sam Harper's calm smile was the only hint that, despite the danger, he had already seen this coming and he was ready. The calm that had followed the first confrontation was deceptive. The radar blip at the edge of detection grew larger, faster, more erratic. The storm had passed, leaving the helipad and fleet intact, but now the real threat loomed. Every officer in the operations room felt it, the subtle hum of fear mixed with adrenaline, the kind that made hearts pound and palms sweat. Sam Harper stood at the center of the room, cane tapping lightly on the steel deck, his eyes fixed on the approaching blip. The wind had eased, but the tension was palpable, almost electric. The fleet had survived the first encounter through skill and calm, but this next phase, Sam knew, would test every ounce of nerve, every decision, every instinct. Captain Reynolds, jaw tight, packing behind him, swallowed hard. "Chief Harper, whatever this is, it's faster than anything we've trained for." Sam's eyes met Reynolds'. "Captain, stop speaking. Listen, observe, and act. Hesitation now will cost lives. The storm is over, but the test has just begun." The radar blip surged forward, zigzagging in ways that no pilot or drone operator had ever experienced. Alarms screamed, lights flashed red, and the low hum of engines grew louder, like the heartbeat of a giant predator approaching its prey. Lieutenant Harper gripped his joystick, knuckles white. "Sir, it's almost too fast to target." "Then anticipate," Sam said calmly. "Predict before it moves. Every threat leaves a signature. Look for the pattern, there is one." The young officers glanced nervously at one another. Fear was creeping in, but Sam's calm authority grounded them. He had done this countless times before, not with radar blips, but in storms, in combat, in life-or-death situations. Experience had taught him that chaos could be managed with focus and precision. The blip darted toward the fleet, this time directly threatening the helipad. The first drone launched too late, nearly missing its mark. Another fighter jet swerved sharply to intercept, the pilot's knuckles gripping the joystick in desperation. Sam tapped the console. "Angle intercept. Lead the target, not chase it. Predict the evasion vector." Seconds stretched into eternity. The young officers executed his commands, their movements synchronized as if connected by a single mind. Even Reynolds, struggling with humility, followed without question. Every order Sam gave was precise, flawless. The blip shifted again, faster, closer, cutting directly toward the central command deck. Panic threatened to take hold among the crew. One sailor shouted, "It's going to hit us. We can't stop it." Sam's voice rang out, calm and commanding. "Yes, we can. Steady. Focus. You are the masters here, not the storm, not the threat. Control the chaos." The helicopters swayed violently, ropes snapping, loose gear flying into the air. Sailors clung to railings, bracing against the force of the approaching threat. Sam's fingers danced over the console, issuing a rapid series of adjustments. Drones pivoted mid-flight, fighter jets adjusted trajectories, helicopters stabilized just enough to prevent disaster. "Now," Sam shouted. The blip's trajectory was finally contained, pushed into a controlled path over the water. One drone engaged directly, guiding it away from the helipad, while the fighters flanked the threat from either side. The fleet seemed to hold its collective breath as the final moments of engagement played out. A violent gust of wind swept across the helipad, rocking helicopters once again. A sailor lost his footing, nearly tumbling over the railing, but another grabbed him just in time. Sam's eyes never left the radar. One false move now would mean catastrophe. The blip attempted one last evasive maneuver, accelerating sharply. A fighter jet struggled to maintain intercept. Sam's hand flew over the console. Adjust altitude, lead angle, compensate for momentum. The crew executed, perfectly coordinated. The blip slowed, pulsing ominously, then veered out over open water. The immediate danger had passed. The operations room exhaled collectively. Relief washed over the crew, mingled with awe and exhaustion. The young officers stared at Sam, speechless. Reynolds, pale and shaken, finally spoke, his voice low and raw. I have no words. That was incredible." Sam straightened, cane planted firmly, eyes sharp as ever. "Don't waste words. Learn from it. Fear and hesitation are contagious. Clarity and preparation are not. Remember this moment. The next test will come, and it will be harder." Even as the adrenaline began to ebb, a new blip appeared faintly on the radar, almost imperceptible at first. Sam's eyes narrowed. He adjusted the console, zooming in. The signal was small, fast, and approaching rapidly. "Looks like the challenge isn't over," Sam said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "This is why some of us are still needed." Reynolds swallowed hard, understanding the weight of Sam's words. The fleet had survived 2 confrontations thanks to one man's experience, but the next encounter would be even more unpredictable. Outside, the wind picked up again. Clouds twisted in the sky, a faint reminder of the storm that had passed and of the chaos that could return in an instant. The helicopters groaned under tension, engines humming in anticipation. Sailors and officers braced themselves, gripping railings, ropes, and consoles alike. Sam leaned toward Reynolds, voice low, almost a whisper. "Captain, observe. Learn. The difference between a man who survives and one who falters is measured in clarity under pressure." Reynolds nodded, swallowing his pride. He had been humbled, forced to trust someone he had mocked, someone he had underestimated. And yet he could not deny the truth. Without Sam Harper, they would not have survived. The radar blip pulsed again, growing larger, moving closer. Its approach was erratic, intelligent, and unnerving. The officers exchanged glances, understanding instinctively that the next confrontation would push them to their limits. Sam adjusted his jacket, tapping the console once more. His calm demeanor anchored the room, but even he knew this next phase was far from predictable. Every instinct, every skill, every ounce of experience would be tested. The fleet waited, the helicopters hummed, the wind howled faintly, and on the radar the blip pulsed ominously, a signal that the real challenge was about to strike. Sam Harper's lips curved into a faint, determined smile. "This is the moment," he said. "The one that separates preparation from chaos, clarity from panic. Brace yourselves." The operations room fell into tense silence. Every officer, every pilot, every sailor knew that whatever came next would define their survival, and at the center of it all stood Sam Harper, calm, precise, unyielding. The blip surged forward again, faster than ever. The real confrontation had begun. The radar blip had become more than a signal. It was a phantom of uncertainty, moving unpredictably, faster than any human or machine could track without precision guidance. The helipad hummed with tension, a living thing under stress, as the fleet braced for what everyone instinctively knew would be the decisive moment. Sam Harper stood at the center, cane planted firmly, posture rigid but fluid, eyes scanning every monitor. His calm, unwavering presence was the anchor for the young officers scrambling at consoles and pilots straining at their controls. Captain Reynolds, packing nervously behind him, had grown silent, his pride crushed, replaced by the stark understanding that they were entirely dependent on this man. "Brace for impact," Sam said, voice low but cutting through the ambient tension. "It's coming fast. We have one chance to contain it." The young officers exchanged tense glances. Fear was thick, suffocating, but Sam's authority kept it from overwhelming them. Every instinct in the room told them that hesitation now would be fatal. Lieutenant Harper's hands trembled as he adjusted the joystick, sweat dripping onto the console. "Sir, it's unreal. I've never seen anything move like this." "Then you'll have to see it through," Sam replied calmly. "Observe, anticipate, and act before it moves. Don't follow, it'll destroy you." A sudden flicker of the blip on the radar sent a shockwave of urgency through the room. Alarms screamed, red lights blinked rapidly, and the low hum of engines escalated into a roar of impending chaos. The helicopters swayed under tension, ropes straining, loose equipment clattering across the deck. Sailors braced themselves, clinging to railings as the wind picked up again, whipping the storm's remnants across the steel helipad. Sam's fingers flew over the console. Angle intercept drones, vector fighter squadron, lead don't chase, predict the course and cut it off. The drones surged forward, aligning perfectly with the blip's trajectory. Fighter jets adjusted their headings, banking sharply to flank it. The blip shifted again, faster, erratic, testing every reaction of the crew. The tension was unbearable. Every eye was fixed on the monitors, every breath held as the seconds stretched. One helicopter rocked violently, loose equipment scraping against the deck. A sailor shouted in terror, nearly losing his footing. Sam's voice cut through the chaos. "Steady, hold your positions, trust your training." Time slowed as the blip made a sudden, sharp maneuver, darting directly toward the fleet's command deck. The radar seemed to flicker, lagging slightly behind the blip's movement. One of the young officers panicked, fingers fumbling on the controls. "Stop," Sam barked, authoritative, his voice slicing through the fear. "Don't react, predict." The officer froze, waiting for Sam's guidance. He pointed to the screen, guiding the hands that would act as extensions of his experience. "Lead the target," Sam said. "Compensate for speed and momentum. Now." The drones pivoted, fighter jets adjusted, helicopters stabilized. The blip slowed, pulsing like a heartbeat, teetering between chaos and containment. For a moment, it seemed poised to break free, to wreak havoc. Sam leaned in, cane tapping rapidly against the console. "This is it. One final move. Anticipate, don't follow, trust the calculations." Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating the deck, the tense faces of the young officers, the swirling storm clouds beyond. The blip made its move, a sudden acceleration, a sharp dive toward the helipad itself. "Now," Sam shouted, and the fleet responded with flawless execution. Drones converged, fighter jets flanked, helicopters adjusted, every maneuver guided by his calm precision. The blip's trajectory was forced into a narrow path over open water, away from the fleet. A violent gust hit the helipad, rocking helicopters dangerously. Sam's voice remained unwavering. "Steady, hold your positions, control the chaos." Seconds later, the blip pulsed one final time before retreating, neutralized. The operations room exhaled collectively, a mix of relief, awe, and disbelief washing over the young officers. Sweat and adrenaline coated every face. The storm outside had passed, the blip neutralized, but the magnitude of what they had survived only now began to sink in. Reynolds stepped forward, pale and shaken. "Chief Harper, I underestimated you. Hours ago I mocked you, dismissed your relevance. Now I see the truth. You saved this fleet." Sam straightened, eyes scanning the room, voice calm but powerful. "Captain, this isn't about me. It's about clarity under pressure. It's about anticipating the unknown and acting decisively when hesitation could mean death. Experience isn't measured in years, it's measured in action." The young officers nodded, humbled, exhausted, and enlightened. They had witnessed mastery in real time, under the most extreme conditions, and had learned that fear and indecision were luxuries they could not afford. Outside, the clouds parted slightly, sunlight breaking through, a temporary reprieve, a symbol of their hard-earned survival. But even as relief began to seep in, Sam's eyes flickered back to the radar. Another blip appeared faintly, almost imperceptibly at first, moving rapidly toward the fleet's edge. Sam's lips curved into a small, determined smile. "The test isn't over. The final phase begins now." Reynolds swallowed hard. The lesson was clear. The veteran they had mocked hours ago was still indispensable. The next confrontation would test every skill, every nerve, every ounce of courage in the fleet. Sam turned slightly toward Reynolds, voice low, almost a whisper. "Captain, watch closely. This is why some of us are still needed." The young officers stiffened. They had survived storms, blips, and unpredictable threats, but this next phase, something faster, smarter, more dangerous, would define whether they were prepared for anything. The helipad hummed with tension. Engines whined. Wind whipped across the steel deck. The radar blip pulsed again, a heartbeat of imminent danger. Sam adjusted his stance, cane planted firmly, eyes narrowing. "Brace yourselves," he said. "Every move from here on out counts. Hesitation is fatal. Panic is worse." Time slowed. Every officer, every pilot, every sailor held their breath, knowing that the culmination of this test, the final confrontation, was about to hit them. The radar blip surged forward once more, moving unpredictably, intelligent, almost alive. The fleet, anchored by Sam's calm authority, prepared for what could be the most dangerous engagement yet. And at the center of it all stood Sam Harper, unwavering, precise, and ready to face whatever came next. The countdown to the final challenge had begun. The radar blip pulsed relentlessly, approaching faster than any simulation had predicted. The calm after the storm was gone. Every officer, sailor, and pilot was on edge. Helicopters swayed slightly under the persistent wind, engines whining as though echoing the tension of the entire fleet. The faint smell of ozone lingered, mingling with sweat and the metallic tang of machinery. Every eye was fixed on the monitors, every mind braced for impact. Sam Harper stood at the center of the helipad, cane planted firmly, posture resolute. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, tracked the blip with a precision honed from decades of experience. Captain Reynolds hovered behind him, silent, humbled, the weight of authority and responsibility pressing down on him in ways he had never anticipated. "This is it," Sam muttered, voice calm but firm. "The final phase, one mistake now and it's over." Lieutenant Harper gripped his joystick, fingers trembling. "Sir, it's moving faster than anything we've faced. We can't intercept it." Sam's gaze remained steady. "Then don't intercept blindly. Anticipate. Lead the target, don't follow. Every movement leaves a trace. Predict it, control it, and act decisively." The blip darted unpredictably, zigzagging in ways that would have thrown any less experienced officer into panic. Alarms blared, lights flashed red, and the hum of engines crescendoed to a roar. One helicopter rocked violently, tossing loose equipment and sending sailors scrambling. "Steady," Sam barked. "Hold positions, trust your instruments, trust your training, and trust me." The officers moved as one, their fear tempered by the authority radiating from Sam. Drones pivoted, fighter jets adjusted, helicopters stabilized. The radar blip, intelligent and erratic, seemed almost alive, testing their every move. Suddenly, it accelerated directly toward the helipad. The room froze, tension suffocating, hearts pounding in unison. A gust of wind rattled the deck, sending equipment clanging and a sailor shouting in alarm. "Now," Sam shouted. Drones surged forward in perfect formation, flanking the blip. Fighter jets cut off its trajectory with precision. Sam's hands flew over the console, adjusting every vector, calculating momentum, compensating for the unpredictable movements. The blip veered sharply, narrowly missing a helicopter, but Sam had anticipated it. Correct course. Lead, don't follow. Compensate for momentum. Seconds stretched into eternity. One wrong adjustment, one delayed response, and the entire fleet could have been destroyed. The young officers followed Sam's commands flawlessly, guided by his calm, unyielding authority. The blip pulsed, then accelerated toward the fleet again. A drone engaged directly, but it began to veer off. Sam tapped the console. "Recalibrate immediately. Use predictive vectors." The officers worked in near-perfect synchrony, every command precise, every adjustment seamless. The blip slowed, teetered, then finally, after what felt like an eternity, retreated, pulled into the neutral zone over open water. The immediate threat was neutralized. The operations room exhaled collectively. Relief washed over the crew, but there was no celebration, only awe, exhaustion, and the deep understanding of what they had survived. Captain Reynolds stepped forward, his face pale, voice trembling. "Chief Harper, I don't have words. I mocked you hours ago, dismissed your relevance, and yet you've saved this fleet not once but multiple times." Sam straightened, his gaze sweeping over the young officers and the captain. "Captain, this isn't about me. It's about clarity under pressure. Experience isn't measured in years. It's measured in action, in the ability to see what others cannot and act decisively when hesitation could cost lives." The young officers nodded, humbled and enlightened. They had witnessed mastery in real time. They had learned that fear and indecision were luxuries they could not afford. Outside, the sun broke through the storm clouds, illuminating the helipad and fleet. Light glinted off metal, reflecting the sweat and grime of officers who had just survived a trial by fire. But even as relief settled, Sam's eyes remained on the radar. Another faint blip appeared at the edge of detection, a reminder that danger was never truly gone. He adjusted his stance, cane planted firmly, voice low but carrying over the room. "Remember this moment. The storm, the threats, the chaos, they will come again. And the difference between survival and failure is clarity, anticipation, and decisive action." Reynolds swallowed hard. The lesson had been learned. He had mocked a man who, by appearances alone, seemed past his prime. Yet every challenge had proven that Sam Harper's experience, calm authority, and quick thinking were indispensable. The young officers, still pale with adrenaline, finally allowed themselves to breathe. One of them whispered, barely audible over the hum of the engines, He's amazing. I've never seen anything like it." Sam Harper's lips curved slightly. "Amazing isn't the point. Prepared, disciplined, and clear-headed, that's what matters. Fear and panic destroy. Precision and clarity save lives." The blip at the edge of the radar flickered once more, faint but unmistakable. Sam's eyes narrowed. "The test isn't over," he muttered. "It never is." Reynolds approached him, voice quiet but filled with newfound respect. "Chief Harper, I understand now. You're not just needed, you are essential. Every moment, every decision. You've proven why experience still matters, why wisdom earned through decades cannot be replaced by youth or technology alone." Sam nodded, cane tapping lightly. Captain, remember this. There will always be storms, always threats, always chaos. The question isn't whether you can survive, it's whether you can act decisively when everything else falls apart. The crew, still tense but relieved, began to move with purpose, securing equipment, stabilizing helicopters, checking systems. The immediate danger had passed, but the lessons remained. Every officer had seen what it meant to trust experience, to act with clarity under pressure, and to remain calm when chaos reigned. Outside, the fleet gleamed under the morning sun, metal and steel shining, but the calm was temporary. The radar blip pulsed faintly once more, almost teasing, almost daring them to relax. Sam's eyes flicked to it, steady, unwavering. "This is why some of us are still needed," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Reynolds, humbled and awed, nodded silently. Words were unnecessary. He had learned his lesson. Mockery had no place in the presence of experience. Respect and trust, earned through action, were what mattered. Sam Harper leaned on his cane, taking a deep breath. The storm, the threats, the chaos, they had been survived. But the fleet, the officers, and even the captain now understood a fundamental truth. Experience, clarity, and calm under pressure were invaluable, irreplaceable, and essential. The radar blip flickered one last time before fading from view. Silence settled over the helipad, heavy, profound, almost sacred. Every officer felt it, the calm after the storm, the weight of lessons learned, the respect earned. Sam Harper straightened, scanning the horizon, cane firmly planted. "Prepare for the next challenge," he said softly. "It will come, and when it does, you'll be ready, if you remember this day." Captain Reynolds, humbled, exhausted but enlightened, finally spoke, voice filled with awe. "Chief Harper, thank you. For everything. You've shown us what leadership, experience, and clarity really mean." Sam's lips curved into a faint, calm smile. "Leadership isn't about words, Captain. It's about action and clarity. Never forget that." The officers, young and old, exchanged glances, understanding that they had been part of something extraordinary, something that would stay with them forever. The fleet had been tested. Chaos had been mastered. And one man, once mocked and underestimated, had proven that some people are not just needed, they are essential. As the sun fully broke through the clouds, illuminating the helipad and fleet, Sam Harper leaned on his cane, watching the young officers with quiet pride. The storm had passed, the threat neutralized, but the lessons of courage, anticipation, and clarity would remain. And somewhere on the edge of the radar, faint but persistent, the pulse of another challenge waited. Because for men like Sam Harper, the world never stopped testing, and some of us are still needed.